I am getting ready to introduce some of the greatest champions fighting poverty, seeking to create greater economic equity. And so I want to welcome and introduce the first guest this evening, Michael Tubbs. My first guest tonight made history in 2016 when he was elected the youngest and the first Black mayor of Stockton at only the age of 26. Michael Tubbs is currently the founder of Epic, and he's also the founder of Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. He's a special advisor to the California Governor Gavin Newsom for economic mobility. And so I want to welcome Michael Tubbs to this beloved community talk. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, for your work, your leadership. And I think I really appreciate the rousing reminder that this is such an evil choice we're making in terms of having so much poverty in our country and world.
That's right. That's right. It's completely a choice. And so I want to dive right in and talk to you about, one of the many initiatives that you have started when mayor, especially around this issue of guaranteed income, because I think it actually gets to the very heart of what Dr. King was talking about when he says that we have the resources to get rid of poverty. I'm not sure everyone that's joining us is as familiar as they should be about this initiative. And so I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more information about that program that you started and where it all stands today.
Yeah, well, much like the inspiration behind the Poor People's Campaign, I learned about guaranteed income from studying Dr. King. I was a freshman in college, and we read Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos Our Community. And he talks about how we try to solve for poverty by solving for everything else. He said, we try to solve for poverty by solving for housing. We try to solve for poverty by solving for healthcare. We try to solve for poverty by solving for education. And he said, all these efforts are piecemeal and stigmy at best. And then he said, I am now convinced, after doing all these speeches and marches and deep thinking and strategizing, that the best way to abolish poverty is the simplest and the most direct, a guaranteed income. And I remember reading that and being troubled because as someone who grew up in church, every Dr. King's Day, I was doing a Dr. King speech or we're doing some sort of play, but had never talked about this part of his legacy. So fast forward, when I was mayor of Stockton, poverty was the issue. Like people were having conversations about educational attainment or about violence or about housing insecurity. But the root of everything was poverty as an heirloom, the pervasive nature of poverty in the city and how it was passed down from generations to generations, where we have entire neighborhoods that have been high poverty neighborhoods since the freeway was built and since redlining for 40 to 50 years. Now, I told my staff, look, y'all, well, I thought I was going to get 2 terms, but it's a different story. I said, listen, we have to do something with the time we have, though, that means something. So let's figure out what we can do around poverty. Long story short, partner with the Economic Security Project. And in 2017, we announced we're going to give $500 a month to people with no strings attached. And Reverend Doctor, you would have thought I said I was going to give everyone assault rifles. The way in which people were so upset and angry, we would get people cussing me out on voice, but like upset and angry. Longer story short, we did that for 2 years, and what we found is that all these myths that you all fight against in the campaign, in which the King Center fights against, these violent myths about people who have less money, are not true. That people spent the money the way you and I spend money because they're people. Those who received the guaranteed income were 2 times more likely to go from part-time work to full-time work than those who didn't. Those who received the guaranteed income were 2 times less likely to be unemployed than those who didn't. And that folks knew how to spend money. And from that success, we launched Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. And now we have 80 mayors across this country, 40 of whom are running their own guaranteed income pilots in the spirit of Dr. King. We saw the child tax credit. We saw some sort of stimulus checks. I think what's been most hopeful in a very kind of dark moment in many respects politically, what's giving me hope in terms of the fight against poverty is that the question has gone from, can we give people money, to who do we give money to and how much and how long. And that's a better place to be in than we were before.
No, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think it is really important for us to talk about the fact that there are these solutions. They're proven, they're effective, right? And they're very popular, right? I mean, you might have looked at people might have looked at you like you were, talking about something from outer space. But then with that data you're talking about, I mean, you can see how much it lifts the load of poverty and therefore makes life, better and for everybody, not just those that are
And
benefiting from it.
and I'll shut up after this. But I think what was telling for me was you had President Trump delaying checks going out because he wanted to make sure his signature was on them. He wanted
Yeah.
people to know that no, that's me giving you money. You had
Mhm.
everyone who was upset, but I have not met one person who turned back their checks.
No.
I've not met a single person that was burning the checks. Like, we don't want this money. We're now become socialists. Like every single body from California to Tennessee, everyone who received that check was happy because it was necessary, particularly the parents with the child tax credit.
That's right. That's right. And it lifted 4 million children above the poverty line. And then our politicians have failed to extend it and therefore sent those 4 million children right back to the other side. And so I think the kind of next question I want to talk to you about is what we've seen over the past 3 years almost of this pandemic, where I think there has been more of a spotlight on the disparities that poverty creates, whether that's access to food or shelter or healthcare or education, the fact that we have workers who are now called essential but can't afford the essentials of life, right? And many of those same things that were actually the very kind of impetus for Dr. King and others to launch a Poor People's Campaign and to amplify and address these issues. And so I think I would love to hear from you, more about your experience and also your vision 55 years later of what do you believe is a pathway to eradicating poverty and to more economic mobility?
COVID-19 was terrible.
Yeah.
But it was more terrible because of the pre-existing condition of poverty.
Yeah, that's right.
That if you looked at the folks who are most likely to be infected,
Mm-hmm.
these were folks who are in poverty industries,
Mm-hmm.
folks who couldn't afford sort of housing, so they were sheltering with many people. Young people who couldn't do work virtually because there's 20 people living in their house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was through no fault of their own, people couldn't even go to work. And those same people didn't have paid time off, didn't have family leave, didn't
Mm-hmm.
have sick days. And I think it made everyone really for a moment think about, wow, we are so unprepared. And for me, I truly believe we live in a time of pandemics. It's not an if, but when they happen.
That's right.
And economic resilience and the lack of economic resilience and the pervasive poverty makes us all incredibly unsafe for the next pathogen, the next wildfire, the next earthquake. So really, I think COVID-19 really at least focused other electives to think about. We have to shore up it's like the biblical story about the foundation built on rock or sand, and it really illustrates to us that our foundation is built on sand. This hyper capitalist economy where a few extract a lot from the many, and many are left with nothing, like not even like shelter, enough for food, etc. And I think in terms of eradicating poverty, because there's lots, and you guys do such great work on this, you all in the King Center, but we know that poverty primarily is about lack of cash, but we also know because of our society that lack of cash does something to the spirit. Can do something to the esteem, can do something for one's vision of themselves. So I think the first thing we have to do is just eliminate the poverty that's physical with a guaranteed income, an income floor. Just if someone can make $100 billion, no one should have $0. That's just simple math to me. Number one, we could do that with a guaranteed income, with an income floor. And then number two, we have to do the work of repairing the harms that have been done by the violence of poverty on people's spirits and psyches and aspirations and the way we relate to one another. And then lastly, I'll also say, I just believe in abundance. So I don't think it's enough for people just to have enough for rent, enough, like that's better than we are now, but we also have to give people the opportunity to build wealth. So we have to look at things like baby bonds. So
Mm.
that children born graduate when they're 18 with a nest egg with something. We have to look at things like reparations, like how do we pay back for not just slavery, but for redlining, for the denial of GI Bill benefits, for like all these systematic things that have caused some people to have less and others to have more. And it sounds ambitious, but let's just start with the simple. The child tax. If we just had a child tax credit permanently, I would be good. Honestly, I'm like, well, someone else can help everyone else out. We got all these parents with kids out of poverty. That's a job well done, and that's what motivates me. And I think this probably motivates you. Is this idea that the solutions are tangible, not just theoretical. We've done them. We are doing them.
Yeah.
People are doing them as we speak right now. People are receiving monthly checks. You're going to hear from my good friend Hope in a little bit about sort of what she's doing for Black women or with Black women in Georgia. Like these ideas aren't just in King's writings and in King's words. They're literally being implemented today in this country. And COVID-19, if nothing else, was a warning. Like, listen, we got to get our house in order. And part of that means everyone should have a floor because the bottom will fall out. And we at least have folks have a foundation because we can actually afford it. And then and the last thing I'll say is what makes me so animated by this policy discussion is that we already spend so much money on poverty. We are already like, it's not a new expenditure. We're spending so much money in poverty because we incarcerate poverty, because we police poverty, because we encampment suite poverty, because we remedial school poverty. Like we spend all this money on the thing we don't want to solve for, which is poverty. And that's why, and I'll shut up after this, I promise, but that's why in California, we're starting this End Poverty in California campaign. Because it's like, okay, the nation's big, but California is the fifth largest economy. California has political alignment. Everyone says they're forward thinking and progressive, and we have the highest poverty rate in the country. So let's do something about that. And that's sort of another play we're making is building off the success of guaranteed income. Let's just have a conversation. Why do we allow so much poverty? Who is pro-poverty? Like who is the pro-poverty lobby, and how do we organize against them so that our folks can be economically free?
No, I really appreciate all of that. I mean, I think about, a couple of the statistics that we have found to be true, where our nation spends $1 trillion every year on child poverty, on kids being poor, right? I mean, if we actually were to spend that money instead to have a guaranteed income to
oh my gosh, I'm like tearing up. I didn't know we spent them. I'm about to cry.
The cost of poverty is tremendous.
Oh my gosh.
The money that we don't pay, workers, if folks were to actually get a living wage, that would help the whole economy. The money that we spend on all of these different things. In fact, we can't afford to not address these issues. And yet this is so much the reality. And I think, you said a lot of things right there that I really would love to keep on drawing from. This kind of history of end poverty in California legacy that you're coming from. But I think also with you posing this question of, well, who is it that is against actually addressing and eradicating poverty? I'm wondering, have there been some stigmas around poverty that you have faced, or have there been some obstacles and lies that are put out there? And is there lessons that we could learn from some of that work? Some of the pushback, maybe.
Yeah, and the lies are so stark for me because I grew up in poverty. I grew up with 3 single Black women. My mom had me at 16. I was on government assistance for the first 5 years of my life. So I remember going to college at Stanford and hearing people talk about people that were poor, and it looked like nothing like the people I knew. I was like flabbergasted.
Yeah.
They would say things like, people want to be poor. Being poor is not fun. I never want to be poor again.
No, that's
They
right.
and I don't also want anyone to be poor. The lies like if people would work hard, they
Yeah,
wouldn't be poor. When the hardest working people in this country are always paid the least or paid nothing at all,
that's
like caregivers, stay-at-home mothers, etc. They would say things like, um, "It was God ordained that God decided that these folks would." That was one thing to hear in college, but then I got into the policy world. I was a city council person and the mayor, and the
right.
same
Mm, mm,
pervasive
mm.
arguments. We don't need to do anything for these people. They don't care. Some people are just going to be poor.
Yeah.
People are poor because they're lazy. They don't need. They get handouts. They're reliant. They don't work hard,
Hmm.
and that's where the passion comes from because they're just literally lies. Like literally, the truth is the opposite.
That's right.
That folks working 2, 3 jobs who are poor, folks who do it, and you said it in the intro, folks who are doing the work around that we call essential. It's so essential, but you can't pay it. And then when
Wage.
we're doing guaranteed income, that became more and more pervasive because even after the data was out, an evaluation not done by me but by PhDs
Hmm.
who I did not know, who evaluated the program independent of me, I still still continue with the same stuff. Lies and myths really clothed in racism and sexism and greed.
Hmm.
And that's why I keep telling, as we say now, that so much of this work is also narrative work and changing the conversation. And I think you wrote an op-ed that talked about how poverty is the sin, not the person in poverty. Like it's not even hate the sin, love this hate the sin, love the sinners. Like there's no sinners. Like
Yeah.
the poverty folks aren't sinning. The fact that
Mhm.
we have so much poverty is a sin. I think that's the work we have to do, and really change conversations around deservingness to that we're all deserving. Change the conversation from dignity being attached to work to dignity being attached to one's personhood. Like I am dignified because I'm a person, first and foremost, not because of what I do,
That's
not
right.
because I work. Because half the jobs that folks have don't treat them with dignity. They can't unionize. They don't get paid time off. They get yelled at for telling people to wear masks. It's just
Mm.
so. I to answer your question succinctly, narrative work is so important, and but I mean we have to look at the history of this country. Like I mean, the country started with like land theft of
That's
indigenous
right.
and genocide of indigenous and native peoples, and then 400 years of human trafficking and free labor.
Hmm.
So a permanent underclass and a permanent undercast was the underpinning of the fastest growing economy in the world. So
Hmm.
when we talk about ending poverty, we're also talking about challenging things that are deeply rooted in our society and
Yeah.
challenge the myth we tell each other about how we came to be. And that's not to say that America can't be a great nation. That's not to say that
Mhm.
there aren't things to like about America. But it is to say that when you talk about ending poverty, you're talking about a legacy that extends to literally 1492, a legacy that extends to
Mhm.
when people first came to the people non-native people first came to this land, and that's why I think the work is that's why the spiritual component you
Mhm.
all provide is so important because we're really battling like hegemonic thoughts about deservingness, about a hierarchy of human value, and about who deserves rest, who deserves to reap the rewards of labor, and who just deserves to be a laborer. And
Yeah.
and that's it.
So thank you so much. I mean, I really could keep on talking to you all evening, all night long. And I appreciate both that history, the narrative work, and then this kind of counter to the lie that we just can't do anything because what you're doing with guaranteed income, what you're doing with all of the initiatives you're a part of, show that just is not the case. And so thank you for all that you're doing in the fight to end poverty, and everything that you will continue to do. And thanks so much for being with us tonight.